All right, Darlene, do you want to take it away?
Yes, hi. Thank you everybody for coming today. We would like to welcome you to our North Metro Denver Women's Council offering. Today is going to be Airbnb 101. And to get started, we would like to say our mission statement, and we're a network of women who are successful realtors, advancing women as business leaders in the industry and in the communities that we serve. I'd also like to real quick run through some upcoming events that we have going on. Next month on June 17th, we have our in-person kickoff in the park. We're excited to get back to face-to-face with everybody. So look to our events page for that. That should be posted on there as of next week for more information. And of course, there'll be emails that go out to you with that event announcement. We also have coming up later in the year, Stomp Out Cancer will be October 15th. More info to come, but I wanted people to have the date so that they can put that on their calendar to look forward to. It's Stomp Out Cancer rather than Bras for a Cause. It just transitioned in name, but it's the same event with the same cause. And then we also are asking for participants for our Christmas party committee. If you would like to raise your hand and get involved with that, we would love you to get involved. Contact anybody on the board, myself, Linda. All of our information is on our website as well. And don't forget that we have on the second Monday of every month, our Monday Mastermind at Panera Bread, that is right at Grant Street and 120th by I-25. And again, that will be on our events page on wcrnorthmetrodenver.com. And I would like to hand it over to Linda, if you will, please.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to start by thanking all of our strategic partners for 2021. Without them, we wouldn't be a network. So I want to start with our Diamond Elevations Credit Union. Thank you, Elizabeth and Ashley. Exit Realty, Margaret and Kevin Hamilton. Our Platinum Viewfinders Photography, that's Nancy. Thank you, Nancy. Our Gold is First Bank, Jessica. BOK Financial, that's Kim and Connie. Thank you so much. And our newest Gold member, Fidelity National Title, that's Heather, Sabrina, and Shandell. Thank you so much. Golden Dog Title, Tom. Our Silver Strategic Partners, Canyon Title. Thank you, Jenny and Allison. First American Home Warranty. Thank you, Kyle. Gateway Mortgage. Thank you, Jay. Gateway Home Services, Desiree. Heritage Title Company, Cindy and Mercedes. Stewart Title Company, Lisa. Supreme Lending, Cassandra. And our bronze level, 210 Home Warranty, Karen. Of Aviana Interiors, Fermina. Chicago Title, Deanna Nisis. Chicago Cross Country Mortgage, Deb. Descendant Detective, Sarah. Goosehead Insurance, Keeley. And KB Homes, Jossie and Martin. Land Title, Shanna Briggs. Nova Staging, Nikki Hannell. And RBS&K Home Building and Inspectors, Rob. And that's who helps all of our strategic partners help us make this network successful. So thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd like to introduce Lisa and Sabrina. So you guys take it away.
We're going to have Stephanie step in.
Oh, that's right, Stephanie.
Stephanie Obermeyer was the one that reached out to Women's Council to say that she would like Lisa Kern to present to us today. So if Stephanie can now present Lisa, take it away, Stephanie.
Hi there, everybody. Yes, Lisa and I met, goodness, about 2.5 years ago. And she is an amazing woman. She's a hard worker. She is completely motivated, organized, and a wonderful family woman. I was drawn to her instantly, and she's become a very dear friend of mine. I think this may be my fourth time that I've been able to help sponsor. So thank you for that. I appreciate you so much. Goodness, what else? When it comes to financing Airbnbs, I really don't have too much restrictions. You're going to find that the Airbnbs are going to go off of county, what they're going to allow. I did just refinance an Airbnb about 2 months ago, and we did require him to stop Airbnb during the refi. And then once we had the clear to close, he was okay to go back and start Airbnb in it again. That was the only thing that was, a little different than what I'm used to, but you'll find you can purchase second homes, condos, and, if you find something out in the mountain areas, those are going to be a little bit different, but I haven't had any issues with financing for an Airbnb. And I'll take it over to Lisa now.
Thank you, Stephanie. I absolutely adore you. We have a wonderful partnership, both professionally and personally, and I'm very, very thankful for you. My name is Lisa Karen Welch. I'm with Equity Insurance Group. I am their business growth director, and I'm supported by an amazing team of agents so that I get to do what I'm passionate about every day, which is educate. Sabrina and I teach 2 classes. We teach an Airbnb class that we're doing for you guys today. And we also just added an accessory dwelling unit class that's been incredibly popular and was just a really great segue. After teaching Airbnb for 2 years, way over 100 classes, Sabrina and I have taught together. We were saying earlier that we used to drive all over Colorado to teach these classes. And when the world shut down, we went to a webinar and we did not skip a beat. So we're so happy to be with Women's Council today. Thank you so much for having us. Equity Insurance Group supports realtors, loan officers, and their clients with their homeowners, business, and auto insurance. So although I educate all day long about short-term rentals, really our bread and butter is basic insurance, and we do everything except for health insurance. Probably 4 years now, Sabrina and I realized that Airbnb was a very hot topic among our clients, which are real estate agents. And there really was no information out there. This is not a topic that you're going to ever want to Google because it changes on a weekly basis. Last year, I became a member of the Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee here for Denver because I really wanted to be more involved, and I wanted to keep my finger on the pulse of what was going on so that we can bring you the latest and greatest information, which we do. And I'm also very active with Mile High Hosts, and they are wonderful. And what Excise and Licensing here in Denver has done with them over the last year has been incredible, and we'll talk more about that as we get further on into the class. But I met Sabrina Kalman probably 7 years ago, hit it off immediately. We both love to educate, and for the last 3 years we've gotten to do so together. So I call her the brains behind this operation, and I'm going to introduce my sidekick now, Sabrina Kalman.
Hey, thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you to the Women's Council for having us. Always great to do a class on Airbnb. It is a subject that I am very passionate about. But before we get going on the class, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. I wanted everyone to know that we do take questions as the class goes on, so please feel free to throw your questions into the Q&A. I will just pause every now and then as I'm teaching the class to answer these questions. The more questions we get, the better the class is, and everybody learns a little bit more. And then I can also cater the information to what is important to you guys. So please do not be shy about asking questions as the class goes on. But like I said, very excited, always enjoy teaching the Airbnb class because it's something that I am personally very passionate about. I actually come to Airbnb on both a personal and professional level. Personally, I have a little carriage house on the back of my home. I live in the West Wash Park neighborhood, and I have a little carriage house, and I am also a former long-term property manager. And, you know, probably about 6 years ago, we had picked up a couple of furnished rentals. And I really saw a need and a gap in the market for these furnished rentals when I started managing those properties. And then Airbnb had also at that time started to become just such an incredibly hot topic. I was getting all of my investors that I work with were starting to ask me about short-term rental and whether or not they should be converting short-term rentals. The realtors that I work with, my business does come mainly from realtor referrals. The realtors that I worked with were asking me about Airbnb as well, because their clients were asking about Airbnb. So I took the opportunity about, 6 years ago to take my little carriage house, which had been rented out long-term for quite some time. It had not been touched since about 1983. So it was just ready for a refresh. And I took some time to completely gut and remodel that carriage house. And then when I put it back on the market, I decided not only to go with a furnished rental, but I went with a short-term rental, or what people like to call Airbnb. I'll use the term Airbnb and short-term rental very interchangeably. And I am the kind of person who puts a lot of planning and forethought into everything. So, before I did all of that, I got to understand the rules, the regulations, the laws. I got to understand how to be the best Airbnb host out there, how to be the most profitable host out there, and also how to understand the Airbnb platform, because it is a very nuanced and complicated platform that has its own secret algorithms and things like that. So I really got to know that platform as well, and got to explore my nerdy side of things, getting to be an Airbnb host on my own. And so it was a very natural transition for me, because all of my clients, all of my realtors were asking me about short-term rental. I started offering short-term rental services and short-term rental consulting and education. And in June of last year, I sold off the long-term property management side of my business solely to focus on the short-term side. So I'm here to be an expert for you guys and a resource. And like I said, please do not hesitate to put questions into the chat as we move along, and I will try to get to everybody's questions. So just a brief overview of how Airbnb works. So Airbnb, I always like to specify this, is technically a rental platform. It's a platform where, it caters to furnished rentals. It's similar to Zillow if you look at it that way. But like I was saying, people use the term Airbnb and short-term rental very interchangeably. So a short-term rental is defined as any rental that is rented for less than 30 days at a time. This is really what this class focuses on, is these less than 30-day rentals. And technically everything that we talk about with regards to the rules and regulations apply to every rental that is rented out for less than 30 days at a time, no matter what platform you're listed on, whether it be the Verbo platform, whether it be Craigslist, whether you're renting it out through word of mouth, the rules and regulations apply to any rental 30 days or less. But like I said, we'll use the term Airbnb and short-term rental interchangeably, because it really has become the Kleenex, of tissue or whatever. And so the platform itself is actually quite a disruptor in the lodging industry. We've always had short-term rental around. It was very common to rent a house if you went up to the mountains, if you went to the beach, but it was never common before where if you were to travel to the city to go stay in a vacation home. For a long time, the only option that we had when traveling to metro areas was the major hotels that were there. And so what Airbnb did was Airbnb brought short-term rental to your neighborhood. So all of a sudden with the Airbnb platform, you have your neighbors renting out their home on a short-term basis. And Airbnb was started with, this intention to bring short-term rental to your neighborhood. The CEO rented his San Francisco living room out and air mattress. And that's how Airbnb got started. And so that's why it's actually called Airbnb. And I do see questions in the chat, so I will talk about this in a second. On the Airbnb platform, the platform itself really caters to furnished rentals. I think what people a lot of people don't realize with Airbnb, they've sort of shifted their marketing, is that you can rent a home out for any length of time on Airbnb. Initially, the platform was catering to short-term rentals, those 3-4 week-long stays. But now Airbnb has really entered the monthly furnished rental market as well. What I've found over the years is that Airbnb has become the top platform to rent out monthly furnished rentals. We consistently rent out our properties that rent out 30 days or more that are furnished through Airbnb for higher rates and more frequently than other platforms out there. We used to use corporate housing platforms as well as more traditional means, but we find that Airbnb is just the most lucrative for our clients. So I think that's little known about Airbnb. You can rent an entire house, you can rent a condo, you can rent an apartment, you can rent a room in your home, you can rent a trailer that you park outside your house through the Airbnb platform. The great thing about the Airbnb platform is that it handles all of the money collection for you. So it makes it super simple and easy. As a host, you don't have to worry about collecting rent. The other thing that Airbnb has done, which none of the other rental platforms did prior to Airbnb, was Airbnb works directly with cities to collect and remit lodging tax on behalf of the host. So anywhere where Airbnb is popular, Airbnb will work directly to the city to do that. And that's something that Airbnb does here in Denver, which is very nice. So as a host, you don't have to worry about collecting or paying lodging tax. The only thing you have to worry about is filing a return one time per year, so the city can kind of track where those taxes come from. Now, the really revolutionary thing about Airbnb is that Airbnb has based its platform on social proof. So what this means is that here I am renting part of my own property out to a complete stranger. And as the stranger, here you are coming over to my house, staying on my property, not knowing anything about me. So Airbnb created a review system where the host reviews the guest reviews the host. And the idea behind having an online profile with reviews that are public is that everybody will behave themselves. Hosts will offer what they promise, guests will represent who they are appropriately. Now, over the years, Airbnb has learned that social proof isn't enough to keep the platform safe. So Airbnb does some back-end filtering to prevent any fraud or scams or risky guests or hosts out there. And one of the things they do quite frequently is during the holidays, they make it much harder to book properties. You're not able to book one-night stays on holiday weekends, especially if you don't have any reviews on your profile. And so Airbnb does a good amount of filtering on the back end to try to prevent issues as well. So just to give you guys an idea of how popular short-term rental has become. And the slide does say Airbnb listings. It's actually any short-term rental on any platform, but it has become so popular in the metro areas. You can see that in the 4 major metros, we've got around 8,800 short-term rental listings. Most of those, of course, are in the Denver area, and the city of Denver alone has around 3,500 short-term rental listings. So Denver, alone has about 40% of the short-term rental listings in the major metros in Colorado. Denver really is on the forefront of establishing rules and regulations and continuing to enforce those rules and regulations. So we do talk quite a bit about Denver in this class, because what we find is a lot of the cities within Colorado will look to Denver to establish and enforce their rules and regulations, because Denver has put so many resources towards it. As Lisa mentioned, she is a part of the short-term rental advisory committee. Lisa's going to give us an update on that committee a little bit later on in the class, but that committee meets, either once a month or once every other month, depending on what issues are happening, to discuss everything regarding short-term rental. So this is a big elephant in the room, and I can tell you it's one of the first questions I get whenever I tell people that I work with Airbnbs and short-term rentals. They say, how's the market? And I think the assumption a lot of times is that the market is not a good market for short-term rental. And I can tell you that at this point in time, it's actually the complete opposite. I would say the pandemic was a true blessing in disguise for short-term rentals. And it has pushed people who would have never tried Airbnb or Vrbo to rent homes out versus staying in a hotel, because renting an individual private home is a lot safer with regards to the spread of the virus than staying in a hotel where there's a shared lobby, you know, the pool is closed, you can't do anything. So the short-term rental market is doing very well. The hotel industry, not so much. But what COVID-19 really highlighted to us in the short-term rental market is that when you are a short-term rental investor, you are not just a part of like the real estate market or the investment market. You are a part of the travel industry and the hospitality industry. And with COVID-19, it really highlighted how reactive the market is to the supply and demand out there. So when the pandemic first hit, bookings were canceled completely. You know, the bookings were canceled down about 80% when the pandemic first hit. But then what happened was, after the shelters in place were lifted, by June of last year, bookings had come back with a vengeance, and they had come back to normal levels. And so one of the things that we saw was any of the hosts that stuck it out. We saw a lot of hosts who, you know, in March and April, they just didn't want to deal with the downturn. They didn't know how long it was going to last. They converted short-term rentals to long-term rentals, or they sold off properties. But anyone who stuck it out in the market ended up doing very well, because all of a sudden we had demand back to normal levels and we had supplies below normal supply levels. So last summer we were booking at rates probably about 60% higher than the previous summer in 2019. And this summer, of course, with the vaccine being rolled out here in the United States, this summer is shaping up to be a very, very busy summer for short-term rental. And we're once again booking out at rates extremely high compared to what we'd seen pre-pandemic. And of course, you know, during parts of the pandemic. The great thing about, you know, I wouldn't say the great thing, but the one thing that, you know, we understood very quickly when the pandemic hit was people started traveling in a new way. So what we did for all of our clients was, like I said, Airbnb has a very nuanced set of settings inside of their listings. So we changed all of our settings inside of all of the listings and advised all of our clients to do so to attract longer stays. And so luckily, throughout the beginning of the pandemic, we were able to keep all of our clients completely booked during that time. And what we did see, though, was we saw a shift towards more local bookings. We still are seeing quite a bit more local bookings than we were seeing before. There are definitely still more people traveling by car than there used to be, although plane travel is coming back. We are seeing longer stays on average. We have this new thing that people are, you know, I like to call it the workcation, where everybody has been working remotely. They had no idea how long they were going to continue working remotely. We have some companies who are still establishing that their workers are permanently working remotely. We have some companies going back, of course. So people are kind of taking their last moments to live wherever they want to and work wherever they want to. So we have longer stays because people are working and, you know, then enjoying Colorado in the evenings and weekends. With these longer stays and working from home, your Wi-Fi is extremely important. It is a must that you have Wi-Fi that supports multiple conference calls at a time. I highly recommend putting your Wi-Fi speed in your listing, or even taking a picture of your Wi-Fi speed and putting it in your listing, because it is one of the most important deal breakers when people are renting spaces these days. And of course, if you could have, you know, like a no contact private entry, people always love that just for privacy purposes. And of course, with COVID-19, that was much more important. And even having workspaces for people, having a desk area, having a second monitor, having a dock that you can throw your laptop into, those are all highly coveted right now. And these are things that nobody cared about before when they were staying in short-term rentals, because they were just hanging out on vacation. Now, when the pandemic first hit, Airbnb reacted very, very quickly. They gave 100% refunds to guests for their bookings. This was a point of contention for hosts. It would be like Zillow telling your renter that they don't have to pay rent because there's a pandemic, which has kind of happened with the government, but that's a whole different subject. But hosts did not take to it very kindly. The hosts, I think, would have preferred to negotiate refunds directly with guests. It was a decision that Airbnb made on behalf of the hosts. So what happened was eventually Airbnb did pay hosts 25% of the expected cancellation revenue. But because Airbnb competes directly with hotel chains, Airbnb encourages hosts to have a flexible cancellation policy, very similar to most hotels out there. So most of the time, if someone cancels 24 hours prior to their booking, they were getting a 100% refund anyway. So many hosts did not get paid out at all. And that's one thing I forgot to mention about Airbnb. Airbnb is huge. They are now a public company. They went public in December of last year, the year the pandemic hit. They did very well. They started at $65 a share and landed at $145 within the first day. They were hovering right around 165, 175 for a long time. I actually haven't checked to see where they are now today, but that public offering has been quite successful. And the reason for that is, you know, Airbnb is becoming so popular that Airbnb really does compete with the largest hotel chains out there. The revenue for Airbnb has surpassed some of the largest hotel chains out there. So this is, you know, a hot topic with the class. And this is why the class, I think, has continued to be so popular over the years, because we changed the class consistently because the rules and regulations behind Airbnb are always changing. So we can definitely see a trend towards increasing regulation with Airbnb and increasing enforcement. The thing that makes Airbnb so incredibly complicated, or I should say short-term rentals, so incredibly complicated. And so, like I said, these rules and regulations apply to any property rented for less than 30 days at a time, rented on any platform through any means. So not just Airbnb, but anything less than 30 days at a time, or what we're discussing at this moment here. We are definitely, so what we do see, and it's very consistent, is that the laws and regulations are made on a local level. So the rules and regulations for Airbnb are different city by city and county by county. So it's very dependent on where your property is located, what your rules and regulations are. We do see the trend that cities have restrictions on the number of short-term rental in some way, whether they require, you know, whether they restrict it to a certain number per block. The primary residence rule, which we'll go into in more detail, is another big one that we see. But we do see that cities are restricting the numbers of short-term rentals. Most cities do require a registration process. So it's a two-step process. You register your short-term rental and you pay lodging tax on your short-term rental. So, you know, we had a question earlier, and the question was about Denver's new inspection fees do they apply to Airbnb properties? So what I can tell you is that Denver has always had a licensing fee for short-term rentals. The new inspection thing that City Council just passed is applicable to rentals that are 30 days or longer. But short-term rentals go through their own registration and inspection process as well. And previous to this year, City of Denver was not doing inspections on short-term rentals at all. But as of this year, they are starting to do inspections on short-term rentals with regards to when people are renewing their licenses. So if you've got some sort of basement unit that you're renting out or accessory dwelling unit, City of Denver is stopping by to make sure that that property is completely up to building code. And the thing that gets confusing is that even if your property is zoned for an accessory dwelling unit or multiple units, it does not mean that it is up to building code. And so that's what City of Denver is ensuring is happening. So City of Denver is going through a registration and inspection process with short-term rentals already. It's always been a little bit harder to get short-term rental license than it is to do a long-term rental in Denver. But yes, Denver, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, has decided that there is going to be a licensing process for long-term rentals, so any rental more than 30 days, and they are doing inspections when they license these long-term rentals. And so that, I think that doesn't go into effect until sometime in 2023, but overall trend of increasing regulation and enforcement. With regards to short-term rentals, you do want to double check your HOA and your lease rules. What we find is that many HOAs or covenant communities are not friendly towards short-term rental. I often tell this story. I feel so bad for this person, but he had purchased a home in Highlands Ranch with the idea that he was going to short-term rent the basement out. And of course, Highlands Ranch is a highly restricted covenant community. And after he had purchased the home and it was sort of his plan to help pay the mortgage, of course, he found out that he wasn't able to do that. And in fact, the covenant in Highlands Ranch even prevents him from renting the basement out separate from his own household. So, it can be a very costly mistake if a client doesn't get educated on what the rules and regulations are and what they are and aren't allowed to do before they purchase a property. So, as realtors, I strongly advise you to make sure that if you're buying in a covenant community or you're buying where there's an HOA, that the investor really understands what those rules and regulations are, in addition to the city rules and regulations. And of course, we always advise that you go with the most strict set of rules and regulations, and that will be the most secure way to make that investment purchase. We do see that cities are getting really good at enforcing short-term rental rules and regulations. Cities have implemented what they call compliance software. So if you are listed on Airbnb or Vrbo, the City of Denver knows it. They know how often you are available. They know how often you are booked out. And so it is very hard to fly under the radar with short-term rental. A lot of times I get the question, well, how does anyone know how I'm renting out my property? The answer is technology is amazing. They know everything. So it's not something that I recommend trying to fly under the radar with, because it's very difficult to do. We do have a very relevant question. Where do you find the rules and regulations per county regarding Airbnbs? And I would, just say, this is for all rentals that are less than 30 days at a time. The best place to start to find these rules and regulations, and these rules and regulations are ever updating and ever changing. So I don't recommend just Googling and looking at news articles. I recommend going directly to the city and county websites. Most cities and counties have some information posted about short-term rental. They want to encourage you to comply with the rules and make it easy for you to comply with the rules. It's such a hot topic that they're posting the information online, so that .gov or that .org website is a reliable source for that. If the information is not posted online, it could possibly be that rules and regulations are not necessarily established in that city or county. But I would recommend calling two departments. Call Number one, the excise and licensing department, because if short-term rental is allowed, there's usually some sort of licensing or registration process involved. And then number two, call the zoning department, because a lot of times cities will say that short-term rentals are enforced according to zoning code. So those are the two departments that you want to call, but you definitely want to go straight to the horse's mouth to get this information. And like I said, it's different city by city, county by county. Go directly to the cities and counties to get detail on what is and isn't allowed. Now, I'll go over some of the popular areas and what the rules and regulations are. You know, obviously we can't hit every single one. The class is only 2 hours. I can't keep track of every single rule and regulation either, because it's just so, it changes so frequently. But if you do have a question about one, you know, let me know and I will do my best to answer that question, or, you know, you can find it hopefully on the city and county website. So you can be pointed in the right direction to get that information. But what we definitely find is that the primary residence rule is the most popular. So what this means is that a property must be your primary residence in order to rent it out on a short-term basis. Now, what makes all of this extremely complicated is the primary residence definition is different city by city and county by county. So not only do you have different rules city by city and county by county, but if a city has a primary resident rule, then that definition of primary residence is different city by city and county by county. You know, this Denver, Boulder, Aurora were the first to establish these rules in 2017. Denver has a very subjective set of rules. You know, Boulder is extremely clear cut. You just have to be in the home 50% of the time. And we'll talk a little bit more about Denver's rules in a little bit here. In Longmont, you have to be a resident of Longmont, and there can be no more than 2 short-term rentals on one block. Fort Collins is super complicated. It's based on zoning. So depending on where you are located in Fort Collins, you may not be allowed to do short-term rental at all. You may be allowed to do it if it's your primary residence, or you may be able to do it on an investment property. Greeley and Westminster had been looking to establish rules and regulations. They were seeking public feedback in 2019. The subject has since been tabled. There just aren't a lot of short-term rentals in some of these areas. So it doesn't make sense for the city to put resources towards these things. Now, if you were to call the city of Greeley, the city of Greeley will very clearly tell you that it's just not allowed because there are no rules on the books. So, you know, operate at your own risk. I think they do, it depends on the city how they enforce when there are no rules and regulations on short-term rental. Arvada is very interesting. They passed rules last year, starting in October. You can have up to 3 non-primary short-term rentals. And what they did in order to restrict kind of the investor in some way is they restricted renting out the property on a short-term basis to 2/3 out of the year. So if you have investors that are very interested in Arvada because they are allowed to do short-term rental, it really makes sense to review the numbers between short-term and long-term rent, because when you're restricted to doing short-term only 240 days out of the year and then renting the property out for 30 days or more for the rest of the year, your numbers could be very, very close between short-term and long-term, and it might not make sense to do short-term. Thornton has a primary residence rule effective this year, just a few months ago. The North Glen is a little bit like Fort Collins. It's restricted to certain areas where short-term rental is allowed. North Glen, I do believe, requires an inspection, which is, traditionally has been very unique. Like I said, City of Denver just now started doing inspections. I do want to mention Lakewood, because Lakewood is they had tabled the subject of short-term rental, but they had a draft proposal for a primary residence rule in 2019, and they're looking at reviving that and passing that draft proposal pretty shortly here, is my understanding. The last time I spoke to City of Lakewood, Littleton is just now starting to establish rules and regulations, and Littleton, I don't have a lot of information on it, but permits both owner and non-owner occupied short-term rentals with restrictions. So I will be very curious to see what exactly comes about from Littleton. And if anybody has any updates or comments on any of these cities, feel free to throw them into the chat and I'll just share them with everybody, or into the questions. So I do want to take just a quick moment to talk about Boulder and Boulder County. Boulder is another area where they've been very active about regulating and enforcing short-term rentals. Boulder County, I believe, has right around 1,200 short-term rentals out there. And it does have to be your primary residence in Boulder. The property does have to be occupied 50% of the time. City of Boulder, it's required that the owner on title is the person who is living in the property and the person who obtains the short-term rental license. So I'm not sure if in Boulder, if you have the property under the name of an LLC or a trust, if that causes any issue with regards to the licensing process. ADUs, accessory dwelling units, are a subject in Boulder. You know, Lisa and I teach this accessory dwelling unit class, and the reason we started teaching it is because Airbnb and accessory dwelling units, they just go together so well. You know, a lot of people are renting ADUs as short-term rentals, but Boulder was allowing accessory dwelling units to be short-term rentals 120 days out of the year. But now they are not allowing any more short-term rental licenses on accessory dwelling units. And Boulder has opened up and changed the rules and regulations for building accessory dwelling units. They are allowing more of those and larger sizes. And that is definitely a trend that we're seeing, which, you know, if you have any interest, of course, the ADU class, we can go on and on about these things. So before I go on, I do have a quick question about the rules and regs in Colorado Springs. Yeah, so Colorado Springs is interesting. Colorado Springs now has a primary residence rule where you have to be in the home 50% of the time in order for you to obtain that short-term rental license. Now, previously, Colorado Springs had a more lax set of rules and regulations. There were several people that obtained short-term rental licenses on non-primary resident properties in Colorado Springs. And what Colorado Springs did was they grandfathered those properties in. I do not know the details of whether those short-term rental licenses transfer with the sale of those properties, but certainly something that we can look into. But the current rule and regulation in Colorado Springs is, I believe, any new licenses, it does have to be your primary residence. And then, of course, if anyone has anything to add, feel free to throw that into the questions. One of the biggest trends that we are seeing with short-term rental rules and requirements is that cities are starting to realize that insurance is a big piece of short-term rental and are starting to add in rules and regulations regarding short-term rental. And I'm going to let Lisa speak to that.
Yes, so as an insurance person, of course, you know, this delighted me. One of the reasons why we began teaching this class is because I knew that these properties were not being properly insured. And the scary part about that is if your home is not insured for its usage and there is a claim, the insurance company can deny that claim. So I actually sat with Excise and Licensing in 2019 and talked them through this. And I love what they added, and which a lot of cities are adding, is simply a check mark on the license application that confirms that you've notified your homeowners insured that the home is being used as a short-term rental. And I think this took care of most of the problem right there. When you decide that you're going to go to short-term rent a room in your home or your ADU or your basement, the last thing you're thinking about is insurance. So I think this was just a reminder to make sure that you're notifying your insurer, and also to make sure what we're finding, and Sabrina knows that when we taught live and what I get at the end of this class in terms of emails and questions, is people saying that they know that they are not properly insured. So not all insurance companies understand the risk of short-term rental, and a lot of them are telling their people that they're properly insured when we know they're not. So there aren't a lot of, not every insurance company insures for short-term rental. After auto, it is the highest risk. So a lot of companies don't want to take on that risk. So Denver requires that the host have at least $1 million in liability protection, and your Airbnb guests will come with that protection. But I want to have you consider the gaps in that as well, so that you still add on that to your insurance. So coverages that you need to consider is that the Airbnb liability coverage is not going to cover your home. So they're really good about, let's say, a coffee table or a lamp that's broken. But if one of your guests leaves a candle burning and burns down your house, Airbnb is not going to cover the rebuild of your home. The Airbnb coverage is only applicable from check-in to check-out. If your guest arrives early or stays later, there will be no coverage. We know there's a statistic here for Denver that 58% of people who are doing short-term rentals in their homes are doing so that they can cover their mortgages. And loss of income is not covered with the Airbnb coverage, so like it would be with your homeowner's insurance. So let's say, Sabrina had a kitchen fire and couldn't rent out her carriage house for several weeks or months. That loss of income would not be covered as it would be through your homeowner's insurance. Again, like I said, make sure you have a trusted advisor. Not all insurers offer this coverage. We have people that come to us and they're with a company that does not cover short-term rental, and they're being told that they are. So make sure that you know somebody, you're dealing with somebody who's familiar with short-term rental. A big misconception that I get very often is that an umbrella policy will cover you if your home is not properly insured for short-term rental, and that is incorrect. So your umbrella policy is just, it's like an umbrella. It goes over your regular liability insurance. It's an extra layer. But if your home isn't properly insured, it will not kick in. So again, making sure that you are transparent with your insurance company and that they understand how you are using your home. That goes for long-term as well. So there's a case study we heard recently. Within the last 6 months, there was a tiny house lawsuit. So we had somebody that was on our call, on our class. She lives in Loveland, and she lives in a home, and she has a tiny house next door, and she short-term rents her tiny house. Well, actually during the pandemic, she had a traveling nurse that was staying there. She slipped on a ladder, which is very common in a tiny house, and she sued the homeowner. Thank goodness this woman had a lease in place because it was a monthly stay, and she also had the correct insurance, and the homeowner won the lawsuit. So this was a very good example of the importance of proper insurance and paperwork. So my story is that my brother-in-law bought an insurance agency 9 years ago. I can't believe it's been 9 years. And I had another job then, but I'm a worker and I've never believed that there was any job beneath me. So I came in on the weekends and cleaned the office. One Saturday, one of the agents came in to do some work, and he sat down with me and explained my insurance policy to me. I was 45 years old, and that was the first time that I ever understood my insurance policy and why it was so important, the way that I was being protected. I said earlier that education is my passion. My bedroom was decorated like a classroom growing up, and I would teach my little sisters. And I knew that I could come to work full-time for a company that educated. And that's what I get to do all day long. Make sure that you guys are checking your deductibles. We just had somebody come to us, a real estate agent who was putting a buyer in a new build, and the new build was really encouraging them to go with their insurance company. And she thought, I'm not real comfortable with that. I want you to call Lisa. Well, guess what? This person's deductible was $9,000, and they did not even know that, or that was not even explained to them. We were able to offer them a $2,500 deductible for the exact same insurance. So watch your deductibles. A lot of these companies are going with a percent-based deductible based on the value of the home. And we all know as real estate agents that those are only going up in Colorado. So deductibles are going up. Keep a very close eye on that. Equity Insurance Group is national, so we write pretty much everywhere now. We are a broker, so we shop your policy on an annual basis if it goes up more than 10%. We also, this has been very exciting for me, and we've taken care of a lot of people. In the last year, we have a couple of companies now that offer sewer line coverage, which is huge. It's only $20 to $40 annually. It does not require an inspection. And we all know that that used to be something that would come out of a homeowner's pocket, and that is not cheap. So if you are not with a company that offers sewer line coverage, we'd love to give that a shot for you guys and get you set up with that and your clients. I switched over all my personal policies the minute we had that available. A couple of things that have been said about us from referral partners and clients. Equity Insurance Group was extremely fast at getting us a quote. They explained everything and offered us rates much lower than the competition. I recommend them to everyone. Equity has been incredible at saving my clients on their monthly premiums. You will be hard pressed to find greater service and value add for the price. If you guys do not already have a trusted advisor for yourself or for your clients, you can send them to our website, quotethehome.com. I have a stacked team. I have someone that does quotes for me all day long, and then an agent who cares for those quotes and calls the client and explains, walks them through it. And in this market, time is of the essence, as we all know, and we are getting quotes out within 3 hours, same day.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. And I put the home in the chat for everybody, so you can go check that out and see how easy it is.
Thank you.
I am about to use Quote the Home myself on a purchase, so I'm very excited.
Thank you, my friend.
Yes, of course. I would trust nobody else but Lisa. So I don't think we didn't have any insurance questions, but please do feel free to throw your insurance questions into the chat. I want to take a quick moment to come back to Denver's primary residence rules. As I mentioned, the primary residence definition is different city by city and county by county, which makes the Airbnb rules and regulations very complicated. But City of Denver sort of one-upped everyone and made it extra complicated by putting in a very subjective set of rules. So initially, Denver had proposed, similar to what everybody else did, where it's a primary residence if you live on the property 50% of the time. Well, City of Denver received a lot of objection to that in the short-term rental advisory committee meetings. And because of those objections, City of Denver came out with, I think this is 7 or 8 criteria that they look at in conjunction with one another to determine whether or not a home is in fact your primary residence. So the first thing that City of Denver is doing when you put your application in is they're looking up all of your documented records. So they're looking up all of the homes that you own, not only in Denver or in Colorado, but everywhere. They can see that. They're looking at, all of your legal addresses, your billing addresses, your voters registration, your car registration, where your kid is registered to school. They're looking to make sure all of this lines up. And of course, the address on your driver's license is extremely important. So that also needs to match the property that you're applying for with the primary residence. They are looking at the number of days that you're renting out your property, especially during the renewal process. And like I said, we don't have a 50% rule in Denver, but if you are renting your home out for 80% of the time or 100% of the time, the city of Denver wants to know why you're doing that and how you're able to do that. So they are looking at, perhaps your source of income. Where do you work? Why do you travel so much? If you are employed by an out-of-state employer, they want to know, where the corporate office is registered. They're just looking very deeply into your personal life to determine whether or not something is your primary residence. And the way that these criteria play out is that it sort of depends on who's looking at your short-term rental application and how they feel that day, whether or not your license will be approved, because it is a very subjective process. And so if you have any gray area, it can be sort of hit or miss with this application process in Denver because of this vague primary residence definition. City of Denver has, they're definitely cracking down on all of this stuff. Like I said, during the renewal process this year, City of Denver is doing on-site inspections of properties. So they want to make it very clear that if you are renting out part of your home 100% of the time, that part of the home that you're renting out 100% of the time is up to building code and is permitted as it should. For example, they're doing inspections on almost every single basement unit there is that's being rented out as a short-term rental, because they want to make sure that there's those egress windows, that there are not unpermitted kitchens down there, and things like that. And they're also they also want to make sure that the unit itself, if it's a closed off unit, is a permitted unit. So it's just something to be aware of. They're definitely getting more strict about it as time goes on. And it's sort of surprising to see, because I think there was a moment in time where we thought Denver was going to get a little bit more lax on the short-term rental rules, especially when the pandemic hit. It really highlighted to all of us how much tax revenue the short-term rentals brought into the city. But it does not seem that it's becoming more lax. And there are some things coming down the pipeline, which I'll let Lisa talk about because she's part of that committee. But we'll go over that in a second. I do want to give a quick example of, how the city of Denver is looking at these short-term rental applications in the primary residence rule. City of Denver had actually done something very unprecedented in summer of 2019. I think we were the only city to charge felonies in relation to operating short-term rentals. We had 4 people who were charged with felonies. 2 of them were a real estate agent couple. We had a builder, we had an attorney. And the way that it worked with the real estate agent couple is the couple, and I don't know the status of ownership at the moment, but the couple at the time owned 3 properties. They had a property in what was Stapleton at the time, now Central Park, Benker and Berkeley as well. The Benker and Berkeley properties, each person from that couple claimed one property to be their primary residence. These were the properties that were being rented out with short-term rental licenses on a short-term basis through Airbnb. What happened was, at the Benker property, one of the neighbors, or some of the neighbors, I don't know if it was multiple, complained about the property itself. Once the city starts getting complaints about a property, they may look into it a little bit deeper. They saw that this property was owned in the name of an LLC, which in itself is a bit of a flag because a lot of investors will own investment property in the name of an LLC versus their personal name to mitigate any liability that comes along with being a rental property owner. So that was a bit of a flag. The city of Denver looked into who the LLC was registered, which was both people, the couple, and then where the LLC was registered, which was the home in Central Park. So with that, the city suspected that perhaps the property was in fact an investment property. They do not charge you with a felony because they think you might be lying about being a primary resident. They do ask questions. They do go through a fine and a warning process. The couple maintains that these homes were in fact primary residences. And so what the city of Denver did was they created an affidavit, a legal affidavit for them to sign saying that these properties were in fact primary residences. So the couple signed these affidavits, handed it back to the city official. This is actually what the felony charge was for leading a city official with false information. So handing that affidavit back was considered leading the city official with false information. Once they handed those affidavits back, there was a criminal investigation opened up where they researched them online. They staked them out at all of the properties, questioned the neighbors, all of the things you do. City of Denver determined that the couple had lied about the primary residences and charged the couple with this class 4 felony. Now, the very good news about all of this is that all of the felony charges have since been dropped. In the case of the couple, they were planning on going to hearing and defending themselves in the hopes that the case would be dismissed. Everything was delayed due to COVID, and at this point in time, they're just trying to process all of the hearings and go through court. So what happened was the city has negotiated misdemeanor charges with the couple, I believe. The attorney, he did go to hearing and he was able to get his case dismissed. What the judge determined is that he and his wife were having marital issues. The home that he had rented out on a short-term basis was actually a home he had moved into. And at the time he obtained that short-term rental license, it was in fact his primary residence. So the city of Denver, the judge decided to dismiss that case, but this poor attorney did have his mugshot in the news along with everybody else. He did have to bring in his colleagues and his friends and family to testify to he and his wife having marital issues. I'm sure that was not a fun thing to have to go through, but his case was dismissed. And then the felony charge doesn't stand anymore, but I actually don't know what happened with that one. We do have a question here. El Paso County requires an affidavit if you have an accessory unit on your property that you will not lease or rent it out. Oh, very interesting. So El Paso County is not friendly to leasing out the accessory dwelling unit short term. We're definitely seeing with accessory dwelling units, once again, super complicated, different rules and regulations, city by city and county by county. Denver is right now very friendly to having accessory dwelling units and is allowing homeowners to rent these out on a short-term basis. That is exactly what I do. That is exactly what I have. We've never been questioned. We've always had our application approved right away. I'm very lucky in that my accessory dwelling unit is very clearly permitted and grandfathered in. So, we're in good shape with that, I believe. So that's why it's been so easy for us, but different cities are doing it differently. As I mentioned, Boulder is encouraging long-term rentals with their accessory dwelling units, and then other, El Paso County does not want you to rent it out at all. So it would be for your own family's use in some way. With the felonies charged, we saw some voluntary compliance happening in the city of Denver. It used to be, when the primary residence rule first came out, almost none of the short-term rentals in Denver were actually primary residences. I would say that now that Denver has been regulating and enforcing short-term rental for nearly 4 years, Denver has gotten really good at it. And almost every single property that is rented short-term is in fact a true primary residence here in Denver. And I can see that when I pull up comparables and I'm doing a rental analysis for someone, I can see how many days available properties are and how often they're rented out. And it's becoming very, very clear that there are more and more properties here in Denver that are true primary residences, because you can see the availability and how often they're rented out. One thing to be aware of, and it is, you know, once again, it's treated different city by city, county by county. I think a lot of places have not even figured out how to handle this process, but in Denver, you are allowed 1 short-term rental license per household per deed, and only 1 primary residence. So like, I can't have a primary residence and my husband also have a primary residence, which, you know, is sort of weird, because it's not really the city's business how we decide to live our lifestyle, but they would consider us a household because we are married. But the thing to be aware of as real estate agents is, as you go through the transaction process, have your sellers disclose whether or not they've ever used the property as a short-term rental, or ever had a short-term rental license, or even listed the property online. Because what we find is that sometimes there's some latent effects to having had that short-term rental license. So for example, I go to sell my home, but I still have my short-term rental license and I don't surrender that. So you want your sellers to surrender their short-term rental licenses and deactivate any short-term rental listings. So say I go to sell my property, I don't surrender my license. My buyer wants to then rent out the carriage house on a short-term basis. They go to apply for their license, they will be denied because there's already a license on that deed. That belongs to me. So had I surrendered my license, that buyer would have no problem doing that. The other thing that can happen is someone buys my property. I have a short-term rental license on that carriage house. My license expires. That person isn't actually renting out the home on a short-term basis, but they'll get a violation notice because I have like an old listing hanging out on the internet somewhere. So, you know, it really is a matter of just having sellers disclose and surrender licenses and deactivate listings, and then you can avoid sort of any complications as time goes on with the transaction process. And so Lisa is going to provide us now with an update on the short-term rental advisory committee. This, you know, like I said, meets all the time. It meets every other month, and things are ever changing.
They are. I mean, think of our last meeting was in April, and think of all that's happened since then. So,
yeah.
Our next one is June 8th. It is at 4 o'clock. It is open to the public. And if you guys are interested, I would highly recommend that you attend these meetings, especially this one, because 2 meetings ago, a type 2 license was proposed for non-owner occupied investments. And actually that went to the mayor's policy review committee on April 30th. And we're going to find out what happened on the 4th at that meeting. We received it very well, and it was agreed that there should be further discussion. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the mayor policy review committee said about it. Another thing that happened a couple of meetings ago was platform accountability was passed through. Platforms and property managers can now be fined $1,000 a day per listing for advertising rentals without a valid license. That was big. They've been trying to push that through, gosh, probably for years, Sabrina, don't you think?
Yeah.
So the type 2 license would be super interesting. It would be non-primary, a limited number, certain areas only of Denver, a higher licensing fee, increased lodgers tax, and these funds would be designated for homelessness and low-income housing here in Denver. And that's kind of following what Seattle and Long Beach have done. So this will be super interesting. Denver did just finalize a contract with a new compliance software, a new vendor that's going to help streamline their enforcement efforts. Like Sabrina said, they are doing inspections now at renewal on all licenses. Brian Snow, the head of excise and licensing, said in our last meeting, we could be on the hook if we give a license to somebody that is renting out something that is unsafe. Somebody said to me the other day, I'm going to open up an egress window company. I mean, Sabrina said that's one of the biggest deals, maybe not a legal bedroom. They have started to inspect at renewal every single short-term rental. And this is going to be really interesting to see now that they're requiring licenses for landlords for long-term, 30+ days, how they are going to police that, who is going to police that. And I'm sure there'll be a ton of questions about that in the next meeting. But you're right. We thought that they were going to maybe back off a little bit after the pandemic. I mean, in 2019, Denver made $10.6 million in lodgers tax. I mean, that's a lot of money. In 2019, with the pandemic, we only made 5.6 million. So about half that amount. That was very eye-opening to excise and licensing. It bounced back quickly year to date this year. Just for January, February, and March, we're at 1.5 million. So I don't know. It's never dull, is it, Sabrina?
It is not, that's for sure. Yeah, so I mean, Denver keeps it interesting for us. That is not to be denied. And you know, I think it did come up in the last meeting. People were asking, I mean, maybe they sort of knew what was coming down the line, but people were saying, well, why are short-term rentals regulated so heavily compared to long-term rentals? And then lo and behold, long-term rentals will be regulated more heavily as well. So it definitely went in the direction towards more regulation rather than less.
Yeah, you know, there's an Airbnb person that attends all of our meetings. And we are 83% compliant on short-term rental. That's very high, incredibly high. And she says that they use Denver as an example for many of their other cities. So like you did mention before, we do a very, very good job here. So, you know, we'll see what happens.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. And then I think, you know, this is one thing that just cannot be ignored when we talk about short-term rental. I think it's probably the #1 reason that short-term rental has become so popular over the years is, you know, we really have this perception out there that short-term rental is more lucrative than long-term rental. And that's just sort of a blanket statement. And what I can tell you is that that definitely was true at one point in time when short-term rental was brand new. If you were first to market, yes, you know, the supply of short-term rental was low. So you were making a ton of money compared to what you would make on a long-term rental. But what I can tell you is that as time has gone on, the number of short-term rentals has increased exponentially over the last 5 years. Because of this increased supply, the spread between short-term rental and long-term rental is not nearly as high as you might expect it to be. Now, one place where I can tell you that short-term rental is very successful and continues to be very successful for a lot of people is when people are doing short-term rental on their primary residence. So before I talk about this slide that's up on the screen, I'm going to take a moment to talk about my carriage house and how those numbers play out, because it does work very, very well for short-term rental because my carriage house is in fact my primary residence. So just a little bit about the carriage house, fully remodeled, nice high-end finishes. It is small. It's, you know, 500 square feet, 1 bedroom, 1 bath. We provide a parking permit for our guests. It has washer dryer. So it's a very functional, you know, full kitchen, very functional, pretty space to be in, located in West Wash Park, which is a good tourist location for a number of reasons. You attract different types of travelers. So we're close to downtown. You do get people traveling for work. Because of our particular neighborhood, we actually have many apartment complexes nearby. We have boomers visiting their children who live in the area. It's great for people just vacationing because it's very walkable. You can walk to Wash Park, you can walk over to Sobo. We have a cute little retail area with Uncle and a bunch of restaurants right around the block from us. So it's a very desirable location. It's a good location for a short-term rental. But if I were to rent out this little carriage house, traditional long-term unfurnished rental, I'm renting that home out for, around $1,300 a month or so. If I were to move that to a furnished monthly rental with a minimum 30-day stay, I'm looking right now, the market is very strong for these properties. Actually, about half of the properties that we work with are monthly furnished rentals. It would rent out for anywhere between $1,800 and $2,000 per month, most likely. But of course, at that point in time, I am then paying for all of the utilities and internet at that home. So you have to sort of take that into account when you're looking at your net. When I rent it out short-term, which is what I do, my average stay is probably about 4 days. I net of cleaning fees, net of the supplies I put in the property, I net about $2,500 a month on average take home. So it's a significant difference between my unfurnished long-term rental and renting that property out on Airbnb. Now, for a short-term basis. Part of the reason for that, it works so well on a primary residence because I have a lot of sunk costs on that property that I would have no matter what. It's my home, so I'm going to furnish it no matter what. So the upfront investment is not extra for me. I live here. I already pay for cable and internet. I just send that out to the back. I pay, of course, utilities on my own home. Okay, it's a small space. It's just a little bit extra for me. Already having the yard taken care of, having the snow removed, I'm on the premises, so I don't need a full service property manager to maintain the home for me. I don't have any of those costs. Really, my only cost, long-term to short-term, above and beyond, are just those supplies and what I pay my cleaners to clean the property. So that is why short-term rental works so well on your primary residence. Now, it can be very lucrative on a non-primary residence as well, but it just has to be the right property. You have to look at the highest and best use for your home. If you're comparing a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in the middle of suburban Lakewood, and you want to rent that out short-term and have it be a hands-off investment compared to, of course, a ski in, ski out condo in Breckenridge. The ski in, ski out condo in Breckenridge is going to be a great short-term rental investment, whereas perhaps that home in Lakewood, not so much because of all of the extra costs and time that go in to managing a short-term rental as a pure investor when it's not on your primary residence. So what I always say, the rule of thumb is if you have clients that intend to be purchase short-term rental property, look at that top line revenue. We use special software to find those comparables. We'll send out a link to that software after this class. Look at what your expected top line revenue is. Understand that expected top line revenue includes the cleaning fees that you collect from your guests, and then lock that off by about 50%. And that's about the maximum you will take home on a short-term rental because of the costs involved. Cleaning, because you are collecting that and then paying that right out to your cleaner, very easily equals about 20% of your top line revenue. So for example, a property is earning $50,000 per year. We charge a cleaning fee of $100. We pay our cleaners $100. Your average stay is 3.5 days. So you're looking at 100 cleans per year. That's $10,000 lopped off of your top line revenue. Very back of the napkin math, your second largest cost is that management fee. managing a short-term rental is very different than managing a long-term rental. So a long-term rental is considered more of a passive investment. You get your renter in there, they pay rent, you maintain it every now and then. With a short-term rental, you are a part of the hospitality business and the travel industry. So you are messaging with guests 24 hours a day. You need to respond within a few minutes because the algorithms will push your listing far down in the search results if you aren't responding very quickly. They want the guests to have a really good experience. The higher you can rank in those search rankings, you know, here in Denver, we've got 3,500 Airbnbs. You need to be on the first page. You know, 10 of those show up on the first page. So it's very important to respond directly, make sure that you're working those Airbnb algorithms to ensure that you're at the top of the search results. Dynamic pricing or pricing your property on a daily basis is extremely important. It works very much like it does for a hotel. You know, a hotel changes their rate daily based on the occupancy levels, the demand in the area. They use, you know, very expensive people and software to determine their rates. You will be the most successful if you do the same thing on your Airbnb. You know, my company, we recommend certain software and we can teach people how to price their properties appropriately according to occupancy levels. And we find that this is one of the most important things to increase your revenue. It can make a difference on a small property of $10,000 to $12,000 a year. And if you're looking at a nice mountain home or a larger home, you know, you could easily be looking at, you know, $40,000 or $50,000 difference in revenue by pricing your property actively and appropriately. So these are all things to keep in mind. But with that, property managers, they charge anywhere between 25 and 50% for managing your home because it's a very active management process. You're looking at a turn every 3.5 days. You're looking at pricing that property all the time. You're looking at managing and hosting guests all the time. So that's the reason they charge 25 to 50% for full service property management. 25 is very common down in the metro areas. 35 to 55% is more common in resort areas up in the mountains here in Denver. You know, 35 to 55%, depending on where you're located, is about what you can expect. So just in that management fee alone, you know, you'll pay about 25% of your top line revenue at a minimum, which is why the most you take home as an investor in a short-term rental is about 50%. It can be a very lucrative investment, but you have to take a look at that in comparison to a long-term rental and make sure that makes sense for you. And so that's one of the things that we do for a lot of people when we're helping to set them up with their short-term rentals is initially we'll take a look at the numbers for them and see which direction that they should go into. And like I said, we'll send out a bunch of resources after class to talk about this or where you can help your clients find this information as well. So I do want to take a quick moment to talk about my company and how we can help you guys out as real estate agents. My company is bnbExcellent, and really our mission is to help hosts succeed, help Airbnb hosts succeed with their rental. We don't want people to just get up, have their rental, have it do okay, or feel like they're doing okay, but then maybe they could do much better. Our mission is really to help Airbnb hosts maximize their revenue to its highest potential. We do this in two ways. We have a setup for success program, and then we also provide Airbnb management in the Denver area. We can work with anybody, anywhere with our setup for success program. A quick testimonial, quick testimonial is, thank you, Sabrina, you provided such an inspirational class. I would love to go down the entrepreneurial road myself one day. The information was incredibly helpful to enlighten me on things I would have not known to consider as a brand new host. And that's really what our setup for success does, is it lets hosts know what they don't know so that they can be as successful as possible. A quick example of a client that we had helped out, you know, this is an example of a basement unit. And this client had been renting out her basement unit for a couple of years on her own. She is a real estate agent, so she's, very knowledgeable about the real estate market, understands rentals, is well equipped to be a successful Airbnb host. So she had a little basement unit, and she came to bnbExcellent because her buddy, who lives a couple of houses down or a couple of blocks down, has a very similar basement unit. We were working with her friend. She was at one point in time just so slow, didn't have any revenue in the slow season, and they were talking, and he was doing actually quite well because we were helping him with his property to make sure that it was priced appropriately, getting as many bookings as possible. And so she gave me a call. We started working with her. And as you can see in that first chart there, right after we started working with her, she had some crazy revenue growth. She kind of went from 0 to doing extremely well, above and beyond what she had done in previous years. And then the second chart shows the difference between the previous year to the year after she started working with us. This second chart is the actual slow season. So over the course of the entire year, she earned an extra 12K by working with the Setup for Success program. And in the slow months alone, that accounted for about $6,500. So with that, I do want to take a moment to talk about my Realtor referral program. My service works very symbiotically with real estate agents. The Setup for Success program is one-on-one consulting to help someone set up their Airbnb listing from start to finish and ensure they set it up correctly to be as profitable as they can be. But the way it works for your clients is really, I can help your clients become more comfortable with their initial purchase of a short-term rental investment. Once clients feel more comfortable with that purchase, they know they have a trusted expert to help them become successful with that. You're much more likely to have them put down that offer confidently and close that deal. And the great thing about my service is that I tend to work with your clients on a regular basis. So I get to keep those leads warm for you. So when they go to purchase another investment property, or they go to sell that first investment property, they often come to me and ask for my opinion about that. And so when they come to me, it gives me the opportunity to refer them right back to you. So I actually have one client I work with. We started working together probably about 4 months ago. I'm sorry, 6 months ago. He's since added another 4 units. He is under contract to add 2 more, and he's looking at purchasing a 12-unit building. So his real estate agent is extremely happy. And the reason he's able to do this is because we work together, and he can confidently know that he's going to be earning money on all of these investment properties. So our relationship is very symbiotic. I do pay $500 for every client that you refer over to me. I do have the link to my affiliate program in the chat there. So, if you have a moment, feel free to sign up for that. If you have clients that are a good fit, hopefully I can help them out and help them be successful investors. And in turn, that really affects you in a positive way with regards to your clients and how you look to your clients. So, to summarize a little bit about short-term rental, I'll go over the pros and cons, compare short-term rental to long-term rental. Of course, some of the pros to short-term rental are it can be very lucrative. I truly fell in love with short-term rental on my own little carriage house. That little carriage house was remodeled 5 years ago. It looks exactly like it did. And the reason for that is because it's cleaned from top to bottom between every guest. So I don't get that wear and tear from a dirty property. I also, because there's a turn quite frequently, I can check in on that property. I can maintain that property really well. Whereas when you're looking at a long-term rental, you have a tenant who's staying for 12 months or longer. You can do basic maintenance, but you really can't go in and do a lot of maintenance on the home while a tenant is living there. It's quite disruptive to the tenant. You really get to do your maintenance in between tenants, and sometimes you have a quick turn in between long-term tenants. You don't get to do everything that you want to do. So with short-term, I get to, go in and fix that scratch on the wall, or fix that loose doorknob right away. So I get to maintain my property better because it's a short-term rental and I have more access to it. And that's one of the reasons that I really love short-term rental. I also love the interaction with the guest. It's a real ego boost to have a short-term rental. People come, they're in good mood, they compliment your space, they tell you how much they love Denver. So it's generally a feel good type interaction. Whereas even when you have a wonderful relationship with your long-term tenants, it's a different relationship. A lot of your interaction only happens when something's gone wrong, something is broken, someone has not paid rent. Part of the process when the tenant first moves in is for them to inspect the property and look at everything wrong so that they don't get charged when they go to move out. So it's just a different attitude that we have. Of course, the cons to short-term rental are that it is much more time intensive. We did talk about that. It's something that you want your clients to be aware of if they are looking at investing in short-term rental. Do they have the time to do it themselves, or will they need to hire a property manager to help them out? The rules and regulations are ever changing. So I think short-term rental is a much more volatile market for a number of reasons. Not only does it react very quickly to supply and demand like we saw in COVID, but it also, changes. So based on what happens in your city, what you were allowed to do, you might not be allowed to do 6 months from now. So if City of Denver decides that they only want accessory dwelling units to be long-term rentals, which is a possibility because a lot of other cities are doing that, I would have to shut down my Airbnb that I found to be so lucrative. So there's some risk to that. The other risk, which we didn't actually talk about too much, is the tenant screening. You do not have an opportunity to do a background check through these rental platforms. Airbnb is very strict about having contact with the guest prior to placing a booking. So you're just not able to screen tenants in the same way that you were. Now, there are certainly ways to prevent damages and bad bookings to your properties. And I can tell you that 99% of the time, all goes well. I have been doing this for 6 years. We have not had a single terrible issue. And so most of the time it goes well, and there are ways that you can set yourself up for success with regards to preventing damages and bad tenants on your property. But it is definitely a risk and something to be aware of. And I think a lot of people think that they are not subject to landlord-tenant laws if you do short-term rental. It's a little bit of a misconception. If you have an Airbnb guest who refuses to leave, the police will not remove that person for you. You do have to go through the eviction process. It's considered a civil case. So I always like to make sure people understand that there is definitely some risk to short-term rental. Please clarify the person you were talking about is not investing in Airbnb, those properties, since he can't own or occupy them all. Yeah, so the person that I was talking about, he owns several properties and continues to purchase more. What we do and what he does is he rents them out at a 30-day minimum. And like I was saying, about 50% of the properties we work with are those 30-day minimums. It is a very lucrative market here in Denver at this moment to rent out monthly furnished rentals. I think as real estate agents, you guys are all very well aware of the low supply in housing out there. So there is, and it's trickled through to the rental market as well. So there is, in the long-term rental market, it's hard to find places. And Denver has always been a good market for these monthly furnished rentals because we have a lot of movement in Denver, but particularly right now, there's even more demand for these stays for a couple of months or a month here and there at a time. You know, people are trying to build houses and they need someplace to land in between. We still have a ton of people moving to Denver. They need someplace to land before they can purchase a house or find a place to rent. We have sort of the double unicorn situation where we also have a million people, or a ton of, I shouldn't say a million. We have a lot of people working remotely while they can. I can tell you that certainly a trend that I see is we see a lot of people fleeing some of these major cities and coming to Denver to work remotely in these monthly furnished rentals. So we do have a lot of demand for these monthly furnished rentals in Denver. It has been very strong for a while. You know, like I said, we started picking up some of those monthly furnished rentals about 5-6 years ago. Demand has always been strong, but this summer in particular, especially with the vaccine coming about, people are taking their last moments to travel, they're moving, they've changed their lifestyles. So this summer is incredibly strong for these monthly furnished rentals as well. So it is definitely a market out there, something to make your clients aware of if they're looking at investing. Once again, of course, you have to make sure that your HOA allows you to do the monthly rental. You know, some HOAs do have a minimum lease term of 3 months or 6 months or something along those lines. I find those are not as successful. You know, 1 to 3 months is your typical monthly rental term. So that sort of summarizes the class. I think I'll take a moment to turn it back over to Darlene, and then Darlene, if you would turn it back over to Lisa to close out the class for us, I think that would be perfect.
Thank you, Sabrina. That was such an informative class. I took so many notes trying to make sure that I got all your information. We want to just thank everybody that signed up and is attending today for attending one of our offerings via Zoom. We're hoping to get back to face-to-face, belly-to-belly, so that we can network again together. Thanks again for coming. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Darlene. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Stephanie. I know she had to get off the call, but oh, hi. Carpool duty.
Here.
We really appreciate Women's Council. If there's anything that Sabrina, Stephanie, I can do to help support your business, we would absolutely love to. It's always such an honor and privilege to be able to educate, and thank you for spending your valuable time with us today. Stephanie, do you want to say anything quick?
I think I'm good. Thank you so much. I always love listening to the class. It's very informative, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. You got your cutie in the back seat.
Hear my kiddos in the background.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.